Hey, what's up guys, it's Kelly. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about my favourite books of 2020. If you find yourself enjoying this video, then please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps me out, and if you're new here and would like to see more of me, then please subscribe. This is always one of my favourite videos to make. It's just so great to look back on the year and just celebrate all of the books that were really highlights in what, in this case, was in many ways a very terrible year. Of course, for me personally, in many ways 2020 was a great year. I experienced a lot of personal growth during lockdown. I learned a lot about myself, but also this year has been a steaming pile of shit regardless of the bright spots in it. So it's nice to just have something positive to focus on and just celebrate the good stuff. So I chose my top 13 books of the year because the way 2020's been, I mean, 13 seems like an appropriate number, right? All that bad luck, just, it worked. So I haven't put these into any particular order, but I do have kind of two categories. One is 10 books that I just loved and adored and would consider favourites from this year. And then the last three that I'll be talking about are my three absolute favourite books of the year that, like, I couldn't possibly choose between. So first up, we have Christmas Shopaholic by Sophie Kinsella. This is the 9th book in the Shopaholic series and it takes place at Christmas time. I read this back in January, like just after Christmas. I was feeling a little bit slumpy and it had been given to me, so I thought, you know, just gonna read a Christmas book in January, that's fine. And I loved it so much. So we follow Becky, who is hosting Christmas at her house for the first time ever. No big deal, right? Wrong. She's catering for like 10 different people who all have different expectations, who all want something different out of the day, and are all expecting her to make Christmas sort of tailored for them. At the same time as she's dealing with all of the Christmas chaos, an old flame turns up from her past and kind of makes her question some of her life choices. All round, it's such a fun book. I enjoyed it so much. I flew through it in like 2 days. If you are still looking for a Christmassy read to kind of make the festive feeling last a little bit longer, I can't recommend this enough. Just so much fun. Then I loved You Let Me In by Camilla Bruce. This was a debut that I read back in January or February and was just blown away by. This book is a little complicated to explain, but I'm gonna try my best. We follow a novelist who is completely estranged from her family because the whole world, them included, believe that she killed her father and her husband. When the book opens, she's been missing for a year, I think it is, and her will states very clearly that if she dies or she's missing for a year, then her niece and nephew need to be sent to her house and they need to go into her office and read a manuscript that she's left in her office. And as they read this manuscript, they will uncover the truth of her life and the truth of her story and the truth about what happened to her husband and her father. And kind of the motivation for them for doing this is that through reading the manuscript, they'll find a keyword, and if they give that to her solicitor, that's kind of how they'll unlock their inheritance. So they start reading this book and we read the manuscript along with them and we find out the truth about her life. So as they're reading the manuscript, we're reading alongside with them and we find out the truth about her life, kind of. It has a bit of a dual narrative going on where she's telling the story of how growing up she could see fairies and she had this best friend called the Pepper Man, and that he was a fairy and he would like take her into the woods and she would dance with the fairies. So we have this kind of very mystical, magical tale that she's trying to tell them, but it's contrasted with the story of a child suffering severe emotional neglect and severe sexual abuse. And as you're reading, you kind of start to assume that this magical, mystical part of her life is something that she constructed in her mind to deal with the abuse that she suffered. But there's also a lot to it that you almost can't explain away, and the whole way through the book you're left wondering if any of this could actually be true. It's just so brilliantly crafted. It's so well written. I loved the duality of the story. Honestly, my biggest complaint with this was that I wished it had been 100 pages longer, and I wished that both sides of her story had been expanded on a bit more, but it's just absolutely phenomenal and I cannot recommend it enough. Then I read The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which I adored. This tells the story of Achilles and Patroclus as they grow up together and eventually fight in the Trojan War. It really is just an exploration of their friendship, which grows into their love affair, and it is so beautifully written. Oh my goodness, Madeline Miller has the most incredible way with words. She's such an exceptionally gifted writer, and if you're looking for a book that will just completely sweep you away and transport you, this is it. It is beautiful, it is heartbreaking. And then I want to give an honourable mention to Circe as well. I didn't love it as much as I loved The Song of Achilles, which surprised me because I was kind of more excited to read Circe, but it was still really exceptional. And if you have read The Song of Achilles and you're wondering if you should read Circe, would recommend. Next we have The Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, and this was so much fun. So this follows Pip, who is an A-levels, I think she's an A-level student, and she has to do like this big research project, and she decides to do it on a cold case in her town. So a few years prior to the beginning of the story, a young girl in her town went missing and has been presumed dead, and her boyfriend then killed himself. So everyone just assumed that he had done it. They stopped investigating, and his legacy kind of has been left to be that he was her murderer, even though they had no evidence really that she's even dead, but also that if she is dead, that he did it. So Pip is not convinced by this. She's convinced that he was innocent, and she starts investigating this for her project, but also with the goal that she'll be able to clear his name. Anyone who enjoys true crime, like if you grew up watching like Criminal Minds and thought that you would be an excellent profiler, you should read this book. It's so good, like it's so clever, and although it is a mystery and there are some very intense parts and it's a really well-crafted mystery, it also has such great moments of humour. There's a little bit of romance. It's just such a balanced book. Like, it handles such a serious topic and so many like genuinely like scary and worrying moments, and it balances them with this amazing humour and this incredibly light-hearted tone throughout a lot of the book, and it's just so good. It's a work of art. Cannot recommend it enough. Then we have the Eldest Curses series by Cassandra Clare and Wesley Chu. I read 2 books from this year, The Red Scrolls of Magic, which is book 1, and The Lost Book of the White, which is book 2, and I just loved these so damn much. My most recent reading vlog, I read The Lost Book of the White and I just gushed about it. Basically, this is a new Shadowhunter series focused on Alec and Magnus. So these books take place kind of in the pre-existing Shadowhunters timeline. The first book takes place, I think, between book 3 and book 4 of the Mortal Instruments, and book 2 takes place after the Mortal Instruments and Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy, but I think before the Dark Artificers. They're not brilliantly written and they're not brilliantly plotted, but they're just so much fun and they brought me so much joy. Just seeing Alec and Magnus together, just them being like a cute couple, them being dads, melted my heart. So if you're looking for something that's just going to cheer you up and bring you some joy, I would highly recommend the Eldest Curses series. Then we have Pages & Co. by Anna James, which is a middle grade series that I just fell in love with this year. In book 1, we follow Tilly, whose mother has been missing since she was very young, and she lives, as a result, with her grandparents in the back of their bookshop. So she grows up surrounded by books. This is a dream for all of us, I think, to live in a little flat, like, behind this 7-story bookshop. It sounds so magical. And as she's reading one day, she discovers that she can pull characters out of books and also enter into the books that she's reading and walk around. And ultimately she realizes that this new ability might help her figure out what happened to her mother. So book 1 features characters like Anne of Green Gables and Alice in Wonderland. Book 2 is called Tilly and the Lost Fairy Tales, so she starts wandering through fairy tales, and we all know I love fairy tales, so loved that one as well, and I'm so excited to read book 3, especially because of the way book 2 ended. I think book 3 is going to be, like, I think big things are going to happen in book 3. I do own it, I just need to get to it, and I'm so excited. Going somewhere completely different, I also loved Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. This was another debut that I read this year that was amazing. Like, there really is, there's something for everyone on this list. This is a dark academia story set at this university called Catherine House. Catherine House is a little strange. It's very exclusive, it's very elite. And if you go to Catherine House and you make it through and you graduate, your life is definitely going to be charmed. Their alumni include politicians and best-selling novelists. Once you graduate Catherine, the world is your oyster. Anyone who goes there seems to just end up having a very charmed life where all of their dreams come true. However, the trade-off is that when you go to Catherine, you commit the next 3 years of your life to Catherine House. You can't leave, no one can come and visit you, you basically have no contact with the outside world. Everything that you have is provided by Catherine. The clothes that you wear, the books that you can read, everything around you is controlled by Catherine House. Our main character Inez is trying to escape a troubled past, and Catherine House seems to be the answer. If she can just get through these 3 years, it'll mean a completely different life for her. But as she gets there and as she starts, living the Catherine experience, it starts to feel a bit more like a gilded cage, and she feels very trapped and a bit like she's a prisoner. And then some strange things start to happen, and Inez is left wondering if they're at all linked to a very secretive field of study that only an elite group of students at Catherine House have access to. I just thought that this was brilliant. I thought that it was so well executed. I thought that the characters were all incredibly well developed and well rounded and so interesting, and I thought that the concept was exquisite. The writing is exceptional. I'm so excited to see what Elizabeth Thomas does next because she is a phenomenal writer. There was so much tension built throughout this book, and I just thought it was an absolute masterpiece and would highly recommend if you're looking for something to fill the dark academia shaped hole in your life. Doing another complete 360, we have Fortunately the Milk by Neil Gaiman, which is another book that I just adored. So this book follows a family where the mum has gone away on a trip and dad is left running the house and looking after the kids. Things are going well until the kids come down for breakfast and there's no milk. So dad's like, it's fine, I'll go get some milk, and pops out to the shop. Hours and hours and hours later, the kids are kind of starting to worry, but also are low-key annoyed that they still haven't had their breakfast. And eventually dad bursts through the door and says, I've got the milk, but you won't believe what happened. And the rest of the book is him launching into the story of what happened when he went out to get the milk. And it's filled with being captured by space pirates and being held up by intergalactic police and all of this insane stuff where the kids are just like, yeah, sure, dad. Sure, all of this happened while you popped out to get the milk. It's just such a fun story. I read this in a night. I read it in like 30 minutes. It was fantastic. It's highly illustrated by Chris Riddell, who I'm sure you all know by now I adore. It's just, so good. Love Neil Gaiman's writing, love his children's books because his brand of absurdism just works so well for children. I mean, I love his adult work as well, but just something about Neil Gaiman writing for children is just next level incredible. Then we have The Truth Pixie by Matt Haig. This is another very small, very short children's book, but that definitely packs a punch. We follow the Truth Pixie who can only tell the truth. She kind of pushes everyone in her life away, or rather everyone in her life leaves her because sometimes the truth sucks and sometimes the truth is difficult to hear. As a result, everyone she comes into contact with leaves at some point because they don't want to keep on hearing the truth, because sometimes it hurts. And understandably, the more this happens, the more difficult it is for the Truth Pixie to deal with, and she starts to hate herself and resent the fact that she can only tell the truth, because she doesn't want to push people away and she doesn't want to upset people, she doesn't want to hurt people, but she can't help it. And it's a beautiful story about self-acceptance and coming to terms with who you are, and that sometimes the truth does hurt, but also the truth is important. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful story for adults and children alike. I think it's a message that everyone needs to hear, and it's just amazing. I love Matt Haig, and I mean, Matt Haig talking about mental health is just... And then lastly, we have Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger. So these are two novellas. So in Franny, we meet Franny Glass, who has gone to visit her boyfriend at college for the weekend, and she started to become quite disillusioned with the world around her. She started to find people, the sort of people that surround them, quite disingenuous, and she's kind of trying to escape the physical world that surrounds her by retreating into the spiritual world. And as the story goes on, we kind of just see her and her boyfriend starting to fall apart and drift apart, because she's not interested in the sort of people that make up their world anymore, including him. And although he's very taken with the idea of her, he doesn't really have any interest in the reality of her. And it's just a very close look at their relationship crumbling as Franny kind of retreats further into this spiritual place that she's created for herself, and retreats from the realities of the ugly world that she's seeing around her. Then we move on to Zoe, which is set a few weeks later in the Glass family's Manhattan apartment. Franny, after her episode visiting her boyfriend, came home and just had a complete mental breakdown, and her mother is supremely concerned about her and confronts Zoe about this and says that he should help. Zoe then confronts Franny about everything that's happened and offers her some advice and some understanding, and he helps her kind of to come to terms with everything that she's feeling and everything that she's thinking. I just adored this book. This is one of those books that I couldn't stop thinking about for days afterwards. I love Salinger's writing. I mean, The Catcher in the Rye is one of my all-time favourite books, we all know this, and I was really worried that it was going to be a one-off. I was worried that I was going to love Catcher so much and that I would read some of his other work and it just wouldn't pack the same punch, but I was absolutely floored by this. I loved it so much. It's just very Salinger. I mean, there's no plot. It's just a look at people and the human experience and their thoughts and their emotions and what makes them tick. And it's an exploration of humanity, and it's people monologuing for pages on end in the most obnoxious way, where you would hate them if you met them in real life. But reading it is such an intense and enlightening experience, and I love Salinger so much, and this book meant so much to me. Then we reach my top 3 favourite books of the year, and I'm going to do these in the order in which I read them, so as to not show any favouritism. First up, we have The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I'm sure no one is surprised by this. The Starless Sea was my favourite book of last year. I finally read The Night Circus this year, and let me tell you, I thought that I couldn't love something more than I loved The Starless Sea. I was worried that I was going to read The Night Circus and it was going to be this incredible work of art, but I was going to be disappointed because I'd liked The Starless Sea more, and it blew me away. It surpassed all of my expectations, and I loved The Night Circus even more than I loved The Starless Sea. This follows 2 illusionists, Celia and Marco, as they're pitted against each other in this magical game, and the setting for that game is the Night Circus. Basically, the book is each of them constantly trying to outdo each other and create a more spectacular tent or a more spectacular centerpiece or a more spectacular feature for the Night Circus. But along the way, they start to realize that they can create even more incredible things if they start to work together. They also slowly are starting to fall in love. However, what neither of them knows is that there can only be one winner, and the price of losing is death. Erin Morgenstern writes in a way that I can only ever dream of writing. Her style of prose is so rich and lush and lyrical that as I was reading descriptions of the circus, I could smell it, I could hear it. For the whole time that I was reading this book, anytime that I put it down, I was still thinking about it. I was walking around the shopping centre that I work in, picturing the Night Circus all around me. I was just so firmly ensconced in this book. I was so fully transported by it. And I loved it so much. Celia and Marco as characters just were everything to me. And I loved the plot, and I loved the writing, and I loved all the secondary characters. Oh my goodness, the secondary characters were incredible. Just everything about this book meant so much to me. Loved it so much. Then we have, of course, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas, book 1 in the Crescent City series. So in House of Earth and Blood, we follow Bryce Quinlan, who is half human, half fae, and right at the beginning of the book, something really terrible happens. A violent crime is committed, and it's something very close to her that affects her very deeply. We then flash forward, and the person that was held responsible for this crime has been put behind bars, but the crimes start up again, and Bryce is asked to help with the investigation because she seems to be their best clue at figuring out what actually happened that night, and therefore what is happening now. We then meet Hunt Athalar, who is a gorgeous, brooding, fallen angel who is now enslaved to the archangels who help govern the city for his crimes in the past, namely attempting to overthrow the archangels. Because he's such a skilled fighter and such a skilled killer, he has become the personal assassin to the head archangel. But when these demon attacks start up again, he's offered a deal. If he helps to protect Bryce and helps to solve this case, they'll squash his sentence and he'll be infinitely closer to earning his freedom back. So Bryce and Hunt start digging into the seedy underbelly of Crescent City and start to uncover a lot more than they bargained for, both in the city and with each other. It's Sarah J. Maas, you know there's going to be some good romance. I was definitely curious when this book was announced because it was being billed as her first adult book, and I was like, how is it going to be different though? She hardly shies away from violence, she's already very much into sexy times and very explicit smut. What's the difference going to be? But honestly, from the first page, I could tell that this was different and that this was special. Just her writing and her world building and her plotting has developed so much. Where with ACOTAR and Throne of Glass, yeah, by the end, they are properly intricate and well created fantasy worlds. They were kind of built upon slowly in the way that YA fantasy normally does. The world is kind of built in incremental bits that you can kind of digest and absorb before the next bit gets introduced. This did what a lot of adult fantasy does, where it just throws you in, it info dumps that this is how the world works, this is the governing parties of the world, this is all the different races and species that are out there, and you just kind of had to remember it. There were definitely moments where I had to go back to the beginning of the book to remind myself how a critical point of the plot worked, or a critical point of the ruling powers of the city, or whatever. So yeah, this absolutely felt more like an adult high fantasy than anything that she's ever done before, and I was just so impressed by, like I said, how much she's matured as a writer and just how good this was. I was expecting it to be good, I was expecting to love it, but genuinely I was blown away by how excellent it was. Anyway, I do have a spoiler-free review of that, so if you'd like to hear even more thoughts, you can go check that out. And I also have a spoilery reading vlog if you would like to check that out. I'll leave them both linked in the description. And then on to the last of the top 3. If you know me, you probably know what's coming, but that is Hollowpox by Jessica Townsend. I recently read this and just, loved it so much. This is book 3 in the Nevermore series, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it because potential spoilers, but basically a virus has gripped Nevermore and has sent the citizens of Nevermore into a panic, and Morrigan has to figure out how to save the day. I feel like that's the vaguest explanation of the plot that I can give without giving spoilers for the previous books, but I do have a review of Hollowpox. If you have read Nevermore and Wondersmith and would like to hear some more in-depth details on the plot, you can go check that out. Also, if you have not read the series yet and are trying to decide if you should, I'll leave my Nevermore review linked below. Obviously, I would recommend reading the series because I think that it's amazing. Just like with Sarah J. Maas, you know, I thought that Jessica Townsend couldn't get any better. I thought that the Nevermore series couldn't get any better. And then it did. I read Hollowpox and I was just like, damn, this woman is a genius. Just the way that she's expanding the world that she's created, just in and of itself, is just exquisite. Her writing is exceptional. She's so, so talented, and you need to check the series out because it's so good, and honestly, it just keeps getting better. So thank you very much for listening to me gush about all of my favourite books of the year. Let me know in the comments what you thought of any of the books that I've mentioned if you've read them, and also just what your favourite books of 2020 were. If you did enjoy this video, then please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you aren't already. In the description you'll find links to all of my social media. That's my Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, as well as my blog. You'll also find links to my Redbubble store, my online store, my Patreon, and my Ko-fi if you'd like to support me on any of those. And there will be Blackwell's affiliate links to purchase all of the books that I mentioned in this video. But that is it from me today, and I shall see you all again very soon. Bye!
My life is grounded in a firm routine of coffee, sleep, and work. I am not